truly grateful for the family. The family of grace has been for us. It's been countless. So thank you so much. And I am so glad and excited to be here. I think I didn't turn this on. Is that what's going on? I'm talking loud enough, but it doesn't sound like any sounds coming through. There we go. All right. For those of you online, that's my boy Ezra. Thanks, Family of Grace, for being such a good family to me. Sorry about that. I just forgot my sound. Today we are talking about. We've been in the story of Exodus, and we're going through 10 plagues of God's judgment on Egypt. So welcome to church. It's going to be great. If you're new here, it's going to be a little bit of a rough introduction, but we are committed to going through the Bible. We are in the Torah, and this is the section we're on, and we go through chapter by chapter, verse by verse, and that means that we're not going to shy away from things that may be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about, and some of the things we can glorify God with. So with that being said, what length would you go to save your child or deepest loved one? And for me as a new parent, I just had baby Ezra, and the amount in which I thought I would go just traveled even further. I'm no powerhouse by any means, but I know the answer to this is with every fiber of my being. This is everything with everything I have in me, I would go to that length in whatever power and capacity I have to save my child. In 2008, Liam Neeson stars in the movie Taken, where his daughter goes on a trip to France, and she is kidnapped to be sold into the trafficking industry. And unfortunately, Liam Neeson is on the phone with her at the time that it happens, but fortunately for him, he's able to use he's a retired government agent, and he's able to use his skills to track down the people that took her, and he goes on a warpath and leaves a wake of bodies to retrieve his daughter, and he goes to crazy lengths. And that's kind of what's going on in the passage now. If we're going to go into the context, Israel is currently in slavery to Egypt. Okay, they have been there for about 400 years with being enslaved for the majority of that time, not all of it, but after we've just concluded our story with Joseph and the brothers and all that, and now they have resided there. That Pharaoh dies, Joseph and all of his brothers die, and a new Pharaoh rises up and says, these Israelites are trouble, there's too many of them, let's enslave them. And so they do. And they keep growing and growing and growing, and Egypt and the Pharaoh come under the strategy of let's kill their babies, and their baby boys specifically, and their job was to throw them in the Nile when they were. One of those babies was Moses, and he was rescued from a river of death, and he was saved in a little, what we call Moses baskets. And then he goes out, he's raised by Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's family, raised as an Egyptian, as a little Hebrew boy, that was saved. 40 years go by, he's out and about, he sees an Egyptian beating on an Israelite, and he kills him. And then he runs away, flees to Midian, where he stays there for another 40 years, as that Pharaoh dies, and his people are still enslaved this whole time. And then God meets him in a burning bush, right? And he introduces himself as Yahweh. This is what we learned last week. Last week we learned that God introduced himself, and he introduces himself by name. I am Yahweh, and you're gonna go and free my people. Okay, so that's where we're at in context. Narratively speaking, when we're reading narrative, we look for plots and climaxes and resolutions. And so Genesis just had it with the famine and Joseph saving him and all this. And then they all die, and now we have the Israelites in slavery. And so if we were to plot this out on where we're at today, going through the 10 plagues, if this is the climax, we're like right here. Okay, we're not going to get to the climax yet. That's 2 weeks out with the Passover, but we are getting there quickly. So just to give you some narrative, literary context of what we're doing. All right? Okay, so let's go back to last week's message a little bit, because our passage is in 6:28. So let's recap for just a second. God also said to Moses, I am Yahweh. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, which is Yahweh, Jordan covered that last week, I did not make myself fully known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they resided as foreigners. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I remembered my covenant. Now, when God remembers his covenant, it's not like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. When the Bible says God remembered his covenant, he's about to do action. He's about to do something that in action remembers his covenant. That he made a deal with Abraham. You're going to be my people. I'm going to give you into this land. And he's about to do some action to remember that. Because right now, if you're an Israelite, you're not thinking that's what's going on. Right? You've been in slavery for almost 400 years now. All right? So let's go over, as we go through the 10 plagues, let's go through God's motivation for Israel's deliverance. Like, why does he want to do this? Oh, that's hard to read for you guys. I'm sorry. The number one, I highlighted them because they're going to be a theme that goes through. The first thing is that Israel needs to know that Yahweh is their God. They have forgotten. They've been in slavery for 350 years or so, and they've been exiled for 400 years. They have forgotten that Yahweh is their king. Yahweh is the one who made a deal with their ancestors, and he's going to continue to make a deal with them, that he's going to be their God, and they're going to be his people. They have forgotten this, and he needs to remind them, and he needs to bring them back to relationship with him. All right? So, back in Exodus 6, therefore, say to the Israelites, I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am Yahweh, your God. You will know. By the end of this ordeal, we're going to go on a journey together. After I'm going to free you from slavery, you're going to know I am your God. I am Yahweh. All right? I am Yahweh who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians, and I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am Yahweh. And Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. So they need this. They need this in their history right now. Now, Moses had just gone through his burning bush talk with God, and he went to them, and they worshipped initially. And then he goes to Pharaoh, and he's like, hey, let my people go. And Pharaoh's like, huh? And he makes them do harsher labor. Then he goes back to the Israelites, and this is their response. They go, I don't know if I believe you that Yahweh is my God. I'm not sure. They need to hear this. All right? So that's major theme number one. Keep that in mind as we go along. Number two, when Yahweh spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am Yahweh. Tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, everything I tell you. But Moses said to Yahweh, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? And if you've been following along with this last week, this is the point where God facepalms. Because he just went through all of this with Moses at the burning bush. He just went through, you're going to be the guy that goes to Pharaoh and does this. And Moses is like, no. Like, well, what would I do? So he gives him a sign. He's like, throw your staff down, it'll turn into a snake. Put your hand in your cloak, it'll become leprous. Like, that's how they'll know. And he's like, send somebody else. And God's like, okay, how about your brother Aaron? He'll go with you. And then he's like, please just don't send me. And it says God got angry with him. He's like, it's going to be you. You're going to go. And so he does, and he goes to Egypt, or he goes to Israel. Then he goes to Pharaoh. Then he goes to Israel. And then he's like, but how are they going to? And God's like, we've been through this. It's going to be you. You're going to be the one, and you're going to succeed because I'm going to be with you. Okay? All right, so let's continue with our passage for today. Then Yahweh said to Moses, see, I have made you like God to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron will be your prophet. You are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of this country, but I will harden Pharaoh's heart. And though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt with mighty acts of judgment. I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites, and the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring the Israelites out of it. God has to demonstrate to the Egyptians also, hey, I am the God. The people you're enslaving, they're mine, and I'm the captain of this entire world. Okay? And the reason this is significant is because Moses, this is back in Exodus 5, but Moses already approached Pharaoh once. And he says, afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what Yahweh, the God of Israel, says, let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is Yahweh, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know Yahweh, and I will not let Israel go. In Hebrew narrative, this is like the biggest diss you can do. What's your name? That's like how you were known. Is your name, what, who? Yahweh who? And so God says, you're going to know. By the end of this, you'll know my name. Right? It's a big, God is going to make sure by the end of this, Pharaoh, Egypt, they know who he's messing with. Okay? All right, going back to our passage in Exodus 7. Moses and Aaron did just as Yahweh commanded them. Moses was 80 years old and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. So just a heads up, since Moses killed that Egyptian and ran away, it's been 40 years now. And this isn't part of like the message, it's a little free handout, so if you're like a note taker, put this on the side. But our view of time is very different of God's view of time. We will turn a page and be like, oh, look at all this action going on, and not realize that it's been years and years and years. And it's important to realize that as readers, right? That we're like, oh man, Moses' life was packed full of craziness. He was in some random place for 40 years before it was time to go back and do work. Israel was enslaved for 400 years before God remembers his covenant. People have been born and died in slavery, and it's still his timing. He's not late, but it's just slower than what we, especially as instantaneous gratification Americans, like to think. He's not late. So just be aware of that as readers when you're turning pages. Pay attention to time. Like even just Joseph, when he was trying to do God was putting him through his rise of power in Egypt, he was in prison for years, falsely in prison for years and years before God used him to save them from the land. So just pay attention to that. That's for free. All right. And then Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, when Pharaoh says to you, perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, take your staff, throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh, did just as Yahweh commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. First of all, I would be completely blown away and terrified right then and there. No more signs needed. Cool. You can have your people. But Pharaoh somehow then summons his wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians did the same thing by their secret arts. Now, we don't know if they did this through demonic power. We don't know if they just watched a YouTube video by David Blaine. Like, we don't know how exactly they did this, but we know that they were able to replicate this enough to where it hardens Pharaoh's heart. So each one threw down their staff, and it became a snake, but Aaron's staff swallowed up theirs. So God still wins. And yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as Yahweh had said. So 2 more major themes that we'll pay attention to. Man, I'm sorry. God is zealous for his kids to be his, all right? We're going to see this play on over and over. Egypt is messing with God's people. He is zealous to free them and will go to great lengths to free them. All right? Therefore, say to the Israelites, I am Yahweh, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am Yahweh. You are mine. You are my possession. I have called you out to make you my people. The Israelites are God's people, and he is zealous for them to belong to him and to do what he said he was going to do in relationship with them. All right? The second one is that God is uncomfortably sovereign. And we're going to get into this quite a bit later. But we'll just read in the text. It says, you are to say everything I command you, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh to let the Israelites go out of this country. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in Egypt, he will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt, and with mighty acts of judgment, I will bring out my divisions, my people, the Israelites. Okay, so we're going to see this repetition of God hardening Pharaoh's heart, which is a very difficult thing for us to deal with, and I'm going to just try my best to leave you this morning where you'll be at peace with it, but it's not easy by any means. By any means, it's not easy. So let's go back before we've even gotten to any of these plagues, before any of these interactions. This is still Moses by the burning bush. Yahweh says to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then say to Pharaoh, this is what Yahweh says, Israel is my firstborn son. Remember this. Israel is my firstborn son. And I told you, let my son go so that he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son. And this is before anything even happens. God already has this lined up. God already knows the end game. I'm going to kill Pharaoh's firstborn son. It's not comfortable. It's not a nice judgment. We're not happy with that kind of judgment, but it's already set. This is where it's going to end. We haven't even started the game, and we already know where it ends. So God is clearly sovereign in this picture. All right, so here's the 4. Israel needs to know that Yahweh is God. Pharaoh and Egypt need to know that Yahweh is God. God is zealous for his kids to be his, and God is uncomfortably sovereign. We're going to see those themes repeat and repeat and repeat through these 10 plagues. All right? So we have 10 interactions to deal with and 9.5 plagues. It's a lot of material. Buckle up. I'll try to talk fast, but not too fast. But we do have a lot to get through. And it's only 9.5 plagues because we only get the warning of the 10th plague. Because I believe next week is a worship service, right? So 2 weeks out is when we will get the finale of this interaction here. All right? Okay, there they are again. All right, so I don't like to get too outliney and booky when I'm doing messages, but this is important to narrative. So one thing that Hebrew narrative does is it'll tell a story, and then it'll tell the same story that echoes, and then it'll tell a third story that's just slightly different. And that's to tell you, hey, pay attention to that. It's different. It's because you would expect one thing, you expect another thing, and you expect something, and then it's different. And Hebrew narrative says, hey, pay attention to that. It also does a pattern where it'll tell a same event or an interaction over and over and over, and only one of those things will be constant the entire time. Everything else kind of fluctuates. There's a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, but one of those strings always happens. And that's what's happening in these 10 interactions, okay? So, some of the time, there will be a warning. Like the passage, the interaction will contain a warning. Hey, go meet Pharaoh soon, whatever. Second, some of them will contain a method, raise your hand or your staff or something like that. Some of them will contain the method. Some of them will mention the Pharaoh's Egyptians or magicians. Some of them will some of them will mention Pharaoh's magicians. And all of them will mention Pharaoh's heart being hard. That's the only one. Every single interaction contains Pharaoh's heart being hard, which means for Hebrew narrative, pay attention. We can't skip that one. All right? Okay, so the first plague contains 4 and 4. Keeps it nice to track. I think God did that on purpose. All right? So, Nile of the blood. Then Yahweh said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning. There's the warning, right, that we talked about. Go to Pharaoh in the morning, confront him on the bank of the Nile, take in your hand the staff that was changed to the snake, and say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, there's our, hey, Israel, don't forget, we're talking about your God here, okay, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me. My people, there's our theme, they're mine, I'm zealous for them, but until now you have not listened. This is what Yahweh says, by this you will know that I am the Lord. There's our third theme, Egypt, you're going to know that I am the Lord. That with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be turned into blood. The fish of the Nile will die, the rivers will stink, the Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. Yahweh said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff, there's our method, right? Take your staff, raise your hand over the Nile, over the streams, the canals, and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt. It will be like that horror scene from The Shining. It is terrifying, blood is everywhere, okay? Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded, raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials, struck the water of the Nile. The water changed into blood. The fish of the Nile died. And the river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians, there's our mention of the magicians, did the same thing by their secret arts. And Pharaoh's heart became hard. There's our mention of his hardened heart. And there's our theme, number 4, is he would not listen to Moses and Aaron just as Yahweh had said. All right? Now, when I picture this scene, I don't know if any of you played this, but it's like, so when the magicians do the same thing by their secret arts, I kind of find it humorous, because when I was younger, as a testosterone-filled teen, we used to play this game where you would take turns punching each other to see who could hit harder. Did anybody play that game, right? You'd take turns punching each other, or like bloody knuckles, or smacking your hands, or whatever, something just really dumb, right? We would do that to be this competition, okay? So I feel like Moses is doing that with Pharaoh, and he's like, hey, here's the boom, the water turns into blood. And then Pharaoh's like, oh yeah, magician, Derek, come over here. And Derek also punches Pharaoh, like not God back. He doesn't punch Moses back. He punches Pharaoh too. And Pharaoh's like staring at Moses like, he punches just as hard as you. Because he also just turned his own water into blood. And it's like, well, what good does that do to Yahweh? You just kind of did it to yourself. And it's funny because the next line is, yeah, all the Egyptians had to dig for clean water. The magicians didn't do anything. Right? Okay? Because they could not drink any of the water. And I find this also humorous because it's not the slaves that are digging for clean water, it's the Egyptians themselves. So God is already moving the nation of Egypt into, you're less and less comfortable for you, more and more comfortable for my people. Okay? So we move on to the next one. Then Yahweh said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what Yahweh says, let my people go so they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come into your palace and on your bedroom, onto your bed, in your houses, on your officials, on your people, in your ovens, in your kneading troughs. They're going to be everywhere. You're going to open an oven. There's going to be just a bunch of frogs there, right? They're going to be all over. There's like a mild picture of a lot of frogs, just so you get an idea. You can't even walk without stepping on them. Right? The croaking is so loud, you can't even hear yourself think. Okay? Then Yahweh said to Moses, tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came and covered the land. But the magicians did the same thing by their secret arts. And they also made frogs come up out of the land of Egypt. So I like to think that Pharaoh's in his throne room, and he's like covered in frogs, and he's just like rubbing his face, and he's like, Derek, my magician, what are we going to do about all these frogs? And Derek's like, well, my lord, here's a frog. And he's like, there's more frogs. And Pharaoh's just like, Derek, how is that helping? There's more frogs. It's more frogs. I need something that works. And Derek's like, well, what's this behind your ear? It's another frog, my lord. And he's just like, enough with the frogs, Derek. You're not helping. And I can see Pharaoh getting frustrated because the next line, he's like, okay, Moses, pray to Yahweh. Take these frogs away, right? And now we see the movement that God is already doing in Pharaoh. He went from Yahweh who to pray to Yahweh, please take these frogs away. And we're only on plague number 2. And we get to see Pharaoh's movement of acknowledging that Yahweh is God, which is uncomfortable for him. God's going to take it piece by piece, and he's going to kick and scream the whole way. But you'll see the movement of Pharaoh taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back the entire time. All right? So he says, pick a time and place, pray, and that way, Pharaoh, you're going to pick the time and place that I'll pray to make him go away, so you'll know. You'll know it's God. You'll know it's Yahweh doing it. The frogs will leave, and we go through the same kind of interaction. Yes, and then verse 15 in the middle, when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron. Oh, sigh, frogs are gone, never mind, takesy backsies, not letting you go. Okay? So we move on. Then Yahweh said to Moses, tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground throughout the land of Egypt. Dust will become gnats. And they did this. And when Aaron stretched out his hand of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. So we see more progression. Okay? Since the gnats were on people, animals, everywhere, the magician said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of God. But Pharaoh's heart was hard. Like for this one, I like to think that there's gnats everywhere. Pharaoh texts Derek, what do you got? And Derek just texts him back like the shrug emoji. I don't know what God did. We can't figure it out. He's got this one. This is the finger of God, right? Just as the Lord had said. All right. So then we move on. Flies. Then Yahweh said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh. This is what Yahweh says. Let my people go so they may worship me. If you don't, I will send swarms of flies on you and your officials, people into your houses. The house of the Egyptians will be full of flies. And he does this. And here's the progression for this one. On that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen where my people live. No swarms of flies will be there. So you will know that I am the Lord. That makes a distinction between my people and your people. So that we've moved even further in the plagues. Now, you're going to be horrified. They're going to be fine. Okay, we're moving you through a story, right? Or we're through an experiential story Pharaoh is going through. And the Lord did this. There's flies everywhere, all around, everywhere. Pharaoh takes a step back. He says, go sacrifice to your God. Doesn't call him by name, but later he does. And I like to think of the comedian Dimitri Martin, who says, there's a fine line between killing a fly and applauding a fly. If you are, a fly came in my home and I tried to kill it, It's after like 4 or 5 times I realized I might be sending this fly the wrong message, and this fly's like, yeah, you like what I'm doing, do you, huh? So I like to think of millions and millions of Egyptians just applauding God for the flies, And he's just up there going, yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, there's more where that came from. All right? Okay. So Pharaoh summons Moses, verse 25, and says, go sacrifice to your God here in the land. Pharaoh's just trying to hold on to some kind of power. He's the ruler of the powerhouse of the known world. Yeah, you can go, just keep it here. I know you told me there, here. Moses is like, nope, not going to do that. It's going to be all or nothing. And so Pharaoh's like, no, Okay. Then he's like, all right, I will let you go. Offer it to Yahweh your God. There we go. He's moved back in the right direction. Calls him Yahweh, his God. Moses answered, as soon as I leave, we'll take the flies away. The flies go away. There's relief. And Pharaoh hardens his heart and will not let the people go. All right? Okay, so from now on, it starts to get pretty vicious. Okay, I mean, the first 4 plagues are definitely bad. Don't get me wrong. But they feel like they're kind of like a nuisance more than anything. Just a bunch of flies, a bunch of frogs, whatever. Now God's going to start going after some capital. They're going to start going after their finances and their wealth and their well-being. And so we start with the death of livestock. All right, and Yahweh said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what Yahweh says, the God of the Hebrews, let my people go so they may worship me. If you refuse, I will kill your livestock. And that's basically what happens, just to summarize, is that God makes a distinction between Israel and Egypt, and all of Egypt's livestock die, and Israel's do not. The Lord said this tomorrow, this will happen. And Pharaoh, verse 7 in the middle, Pharaoh investigated and found that not even one of the animals of the Israelites had died. Yet his heart was unyielding, and he would not let the people go. All right, God's got to keep moving him along. Then Yahweh said to Moses and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from a furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh. Like in the presence of Pharaoh is like, this is like the old school mic drop where he's like just grabs the soot, is staring Pharaoh in the eyes and just, and Pharaoh's like, what does this mean now? Oh boy, what is going on now? And it turns into boils that break out over everything. And if you tell me that God doesn't have a sense of humor, I don't think you're right. I think God does have a sense of humor because it mentions the Egyptians and it mentions that they couldn't even stand before them because of the boils. He's like, hey, Moses, when you're writing this, don't forget to tell them that the magicians couldn't even come out and try it because they were covered in boils. It's just God he's just on it. He has moved it to a new level, right? You've hopefully seen the progression that God is moving them on, right? Okay, so we move on. Then Yahweh said to Moses, get up early in the morning, confront Pharaoh and say to him, this is what Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, says. Let my people go so they may worship me. For this time I will send the full force of my plagues against you and against your officials and your people, so you may know there is no one like me in all the earth. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people down with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. But I have raised you up for this very purpose, that I might show you my power and my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later, but we see a huge reveal from God that it is not, he already has endgame in sight. We're going to go 10 rounds. It's going to end with the death of your son. And not only that, I put you there so I could crush you, so I can show the world I am God. That's not comfortable. Listener here, reader here, that's not comfortable. That's like, oh, can God do that? Is God allowed to do that? Is he allowed to be sovereign like that? And the story is not trying to give us an explanation for God's sovereignty. It's just saying that that's what happens. Man, we're going to have to wrestle through that. We're going to have to wrestle that God can do things that, are we allowed to do that? No. God's allowed to do that? Yeah. Okay? And if you're a skeptic in the audience, you might think, God just sounds like an egomaniac. He just sounds like he's just trying to make sure he does something so crazy that everybody knows his name. Like, if a human were to do that, yes, they're being an egomaniac. The difference is that it's his status. That's his position. He is God. He is creator. And if it is his obligation and duty and prerogative to tell the world who he is, so they know. They have to have, his creation has to have right relationship with him. He is God. They are not. And they never will be in the same status. He is holy and set apart. And he's allowed to do things that we're not allowed to do. He's not evil. He doesn't sin. But he's allowed to do things we're not allowed to do. Okay? It's not easy or comfortable. But it's true. You will set yourself, you still set yourself against my people and will not let them go. Therefore, this time tomorrow, I will send the worst hailstorm that has ever fallen on Egypt from the day it was founded till now. Give an order now to bring the livestock and everything you have on the field in a place of shelter, because the hail will fall on every person, an animal that has not been brought in and is still out in the field, and they will die. So here's the movement. See the movement. those officials, Pharaoh, who feared the word of Yahweh, hurried to bring their slaves and their livestock inside. So now we have the nation starting to be like, no, we should listen to this guy. Right? We went from complete and utter disrespect, don't know who you are, we can replicate it, we can't replicate it, and now we're also scared of what you say you're going to do. Some, not all, but some. God's taking them on a journey. Right, those who ignored the word of the Lord left their slaves and their livestock in the fields. And that's what happens. A crazy hailstorm happens, and it kills everything that's out and about, and it strips a lot of the plants and the agriculture, and it just destroys a lot of stuff. Okay? Then Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "This time I have sinned." First time he's now made this kind of claim. "This time I have sinned. Yahweh is in the right, and me and my people are in the wrong. I'm sorry. I went too far." How far does Pharaoh have to take him? All right? You don't have to stay any longer. Moses replied, "Okay, I'll go pray." It's just the same story. I'll go pray. Relief happens. He and his officials hardened their hearts. So Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not let the Israelites go, just as Yahweh had said through Moses. All right? Almost there. Pulse check. Everybody doing okay? We've gone through 7 plagues. Good. You guys with me still? Okay, this is a lot to cover, I know, to make sure we're still in it. Okay? Good. Because from here on out, it gets a little hairy. All right? Locusts. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them, that you may tell your children and your grandchildren how I dealt harshly with the Egyptians and how I performed my signs among them, and that you may know that I'm the Lord." I'm going to make sure this event is so insane, you're going to tell your kids and kids and kids and kids and kids, and you're going to know, for that long, you're going to know that I am your God. It's going to be that crazy. Right? It's intentional, it's deliberate, and it's not fun for Pharaoh's side of things, and it's very awe-inspiring and terrifying for our side of things to be a witness to this account. Right? So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said to him, "This is what we're going to do. We're going to send locusts all over, and now watch Pharaoh to still try to cling to power." He says, "They'll fill your house. Locusts are going to be everywhere, all over." Pharaoh's officials said to him, and so Pharaoh's officials go to Pharaoh, and they're like, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so they may worship Yahweh their God." So now you have his corner is going, "Dude, let him go. Let them go, please. Don't you see that Egypt is ruined? We're 7 plagues in with the threat of an 8th. Just let him go." And Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go worship the Lord your God, but tell me who will be going. I still need to have a little bit of power. Tell me who." And they're like, "Men, women, everybody." And he says, Pharaoh said, "Lord be with you if I let you go along with your women and children. Clearly you are bent on evil." No. So he's just like trying to hold on to power, right? I mean, we've said what it needs to be. Everybody and their animals from the beginning. And he's just like, "Just the men. Come on." And it's like, so no. So then the locusts come. Right? He's trying so hard, and God is going to painfully pull away all of Pharaoh's power. God has a thing for lowering human kings that call themselves God. He has a thing for lowering them and humbling them. Right? Nebuchadnezzar's one down the road. Okay? So that happens. Locusts come and eat literally everything green. There's nothing left. There's no fruit, no agriculture. All of it's gone. Locusts come over. Pharaoh, 16 in the middle. Pharaoh quickly summoned Moses and Aaron. "I have sinned against Yahweh, your God, and against you. Now forgive me my sin once more. Pray to Yahweh, your God. Take this deadly plague away from me." And this time we have it something different, but Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go. That's troubling. But the rest of the plagues now, Yahweh is the one hardening Pharaoh's heart. And so for me, to best understand this, but it also confuses me, so hang in there with me, is like Liam Neeson goes full rage mode to free his daughter, right? And so he finds the person who did it, but instead of just killing them, like God said he could, I could have just wiped you out. Instead of just killing him, he puts him in the octagon and says, "We're going 10 rounds. You and I, we're going to go 10 rounds. And after the first round, he pummels him. And Pharaoh doesn't even land a punch. And he's like, I think this guy got lucky. We're going round 2. And he just does it again. Not even a single punch on Liam Neeson. Okay? And then we get to number 3, number 4, number 5, and then we eventually get to where people are like the guys in Pharaoh's corner are like, "Hey, let his daughter go." Liam Neeson came angrily for his daughter, let his daughter go. Pharaoh's like, "No." And then we get to round 8, and Liam Neeson's like, let my daughter go. And then he also remembers the skills he acquired when he played Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace, and he Jedi mind tricks him and says, you will not let my daughter go. And Pharaoh's like, I'm not going to let your daughter go. He goes, okay, well, I guess we're going another round. And then they go another round, and it beats him. And then it happens again, and he goes, hey, let my daughter go. And Pharaoh's people are like, hey, let his daughter go. And he's like, you'll not let my daughter go. And he's like, I'm not going to let your daughter go. He's like, all right, we're going another round, right? And it's like, that's what's happening, but that's awkward. That's hard. Like, how is Pharaoh, like, something we deal with in Romans 9 and even in this is like, how does God hold Pharaoh accountable? He's the one pulling the strings. It's because God has a bigger plan, which we're going to get to. But this is not easy. It's not easy. God said from the beginning, I'm going to kill Pharaoh's kid. He killed mine. We know that this is the game plan. Right? And we're going to get to, hopefully by the end of this, you'll be a little bit more at ease because there's going to be some things that explain it a little bit, but it still doesn't make it an easy theology to understand. Right? God is really sovereign. Okay? And then the last one is darkness. There's no warning or anything. He just covers it in darkness. And same deal happens. Yahweh hardens Pharaoh's heart. There's a darkness that is so dark that it can be felt, the scripture says. Like the Egyptians, but there's no darkness in Israel, like the Israelite in the land of Goshen. And Egypt is just swarmed in darkness that you can feel it. So dark. And Pharaoh goes to Moses and says, please. And then he hardens his heart. Okay? Now, I did forget one thing. With this interaction here, the thing that Pharaoh tries to hold on to, he's like, okay, let the men, the women, and the children can go, leave the animals. He's like, just give me some slice of dignity, right? Like, at least do one thing that I say, that I want. And Pharaoh's like, nope. And so it ends on a bad interaction. He's like, if you come before me again, you're going to die. Like Pharaoh and Moses now, he's like, fine, I'm over it. So then we get to the warning of the 10th one. We don't get to the 10th one. That's in 2 weeks. But we do get to the warning. Now Yahweh had said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here. And when he does, he will drive you out completely. Tell the people that men and women alike are to ask their neighbors for articles of silver and gold. Yahweh made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people. Moses himself was highly regarded in Egypt. Now this is a weird thing to add, but actually if you go back, God had already said this was going to happen too. He's already said, you're going to be enslaved. I'm going to make you favorably disposed towards the Egyptians. I'm going to do crazy acts of judgment. You're going to go around to them and say, can I have some silver and gold? And they're going to say, good riddance, yes. And then you're going to leave there rich, plundering the Egyptians. This has already been determined. Like God has already said this is going to happen. And here it is happening, about to happen. All right? So Moses said, this is what the Yahweh says about midnight. I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh who sits on the throne to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well. There will be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there ever has been or ever will be again. But among the Israelites, not a dog will bark at any person or animal. Then you will know that Yahweh makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. You messed with the wrong God's kid. I'm coming for him. All right? All these officials of yours will come to me, bowing down before me, saying, go, you and all the people who follow you. After that, I will leave. Then Moses, hot with anger, left Pharaoh. And Yahweh had said to Moses, Pharaoh will refuse to listen to you so that my wonders may be multiplied in Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all the wonders before Pharaoh, but Yahweh hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let the Israelites go out of the country. Okay, and with that concludes our text, as we are right on the cusp of the climax, leading to 2 weeks from now. We still need to figure out what in the world do we do with 9.5 plagues. What do we do with this? Okay? Why 10 plagues, first of all? Why these 10 plagues, as a reader? Why flies? Why frogs? Why darkness? Okay, remember that God's initiative is to make war on the Egyptians and their gods. And we don't know all of this as like common readers, but his plagues are a direct punch at the Egyptian gods at the time. Okay, so you can't read that at all, but just like take my word for it. That's a list of a bunch of Egyptian gods. Okay, like one of them is Isis, the god of the Nile. God turns the water of the Nile into blood. One of them is Hapi, who's got like a frog head. Well, a bunch of frogs are going to plague you. Ra, the sun god, is going to be a bunch of darkness, right? There's one that's the shape of a fly, a bunch of flies, right? So they're weird plagues, but they would make a whole lot of sense to Egypt. They'd be like, if you were real, you would not let this happen, Egyptian God. Ra, how would you let the sun be blocked? You're the sun God. God is showing that he is the God, Yahweh God. So that's why there are these weird 10 plagues. And I would like to think if God had to do this to us today, like what 10 plagues would he choose? What, food for thought. What is our gods that God would have to destroy for us to go, oh, you're God. That's you. Oh, our finances or our comfort or security. I don't know what it would be, but it wouldn't be, flies and frogs. That was specific for them. But we still need to take it as listeners and go, what would that be for me? And so that's why it's those 10 plagues specifically. For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth. So why 10 plagues? God says, I could have just wiped you out. But I'm going to take you on this journey through 10 plagues. Because you need to know, if I just wipe you out, it's not the story that I need to tell. There's a story I need to tell, and it's not just you being gone. I'm going to slowly and painfully strip you of your power, and you're going to acknowledge that I'm God, and that Israel's going to know that he's God, and the rest of the world is going to know that he's God. He's got intention. It's 10 plagues for a reason. He takes them on a full adventure for a reason. The world needs to know who he is. He's God. There's no one like him. That is back in Exodus 4. This is what Yahweh says. Israel is my firstborn son. I told you, let my son go so that he will worship me, but you refuse, so I will kill your firstborn son. Not comfortable, but God is sovereign and just, and he's going after him. That's why it goes the full length of 10 plagues. Okay? This is a quote from Gary Edward Schnitcher, which really, I think, helps me understand another reason for why it goes 10 plagues. It is true that Pharaoh hardened his own heart 6 times before God did. It is an escape tactic, however, to say that God merely confirmed the stubborn pattern of Pharaoh's heart. God was explicit that he was planning to harden Pharaoh's heart because he wanted to perform all his acts of judgment against the Egyptians. God did not have to do it that way, but this is the way he chose to do it. Thus, the significance of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart in the immediate context is related to the sovereign display of God's power. No one let the Israelites go. It was God who brought them out of Egypt by his fear-inspiring acts of judgment. It's from the Torah story. So it's important that God takes them on a 10-plague adventure so that nobody could claim that Pharaoh let him go. Nobody could claim that the Israelites got lucky and they just got wiped out by a pestilence. It is a deliberate 10-step process where God gets all the credit. God wants all the credit, he's going to get all the credit. And that takes effect later on as well. So, what do we do with this? Israel, by this, knows that Yahweh is God. Egypt knows that Yahweh is God. Family of grace, do you know that Yahweh is God? Does he sit rightly where he's supposed to in your heart? Is he as holy and terrifying as he's supposed to be? We don't worship a different God than this God. He's terrifying. He's all-powerful. He's what theologians call transcendent. He is so far beyond what we can even comprehend. He is creator. We are created. He is endless, timeless, without ceasing. We are temporary. Unless we're in him, then we'll get to be eternal. But we are in a different category. He is holy. He is set apart. The time that we struggle the most as Christians is when we forget this. We forget who he is. I'll be the first to say I forget all the time. Usually when I'm in sin is when I've forgotten this. When I'm worried or anxious, I've forgotten this. When I'm stressed out about something, I've forgotten this. Right? Do you know that Yahweh is God? Do you know his power? Can you fathom it? Can you just spend some time this week thinking and pondering on the power and awesomeness of God? Put him in the right place of your heart. He doesn't like being second or third or fourth. He demands to be first. And that's where he deserves because of his status. Right? That is who he is. He is transcendent. He is God. Do you know it? Okay? And what do we do with this? God's zealous for his kids to be his. He goes to a crazy length to free his firstborn son from Egypt. He goes to a crazy length. A whole 10-part strategy. Serious destruction of a nation. Okay? Do you know how much God wants you to be his? You know the lengths he'll go? The lengths he'll go for you? Let me show you the lengths that he goes for you, okay? So let's tie this to Jesus, because that's what this story does. So let's think about this, all right? Egypt, guilty of killing God's son. That's what God calls it, my firstborn son. You killed him. God consumes Egypt with 10 plagues of wrath, and God kills Pharaoh's firstborn son. All right? Let's think about this. Who's God's real firstborn son? Jesus. Who kills Jesus? We do, because of our sin. And what does God do with us? He doesn't consume us with 10 plagues of wrath. Instead, he puts our sin on Jesus and consumes him with 10 plagues of wrath in our place. God consumes Jesus with 10 plagues worth of wrath on the cross while he bears all of our sin. His firstborn son, his real firstborn son. I just had a firstborn son. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that. And God uses the death of his firstborn son to free us and to save us instead of consuming us in his anger. He's a good God. He is fully transcendent, yes, but he will go to insane lengths to save you. Do you get that this week? Do you know the length that he would go to save you from your sin so he can be with you and I can have a relationship with you? He's a loving God. He's an intimate God. He's both fully transcendent and fully intimate and is just delighted in you. So delighted in you. Wants you so bad. Man, may we believe this. Another way we link it to Jesus is that God uses this really creative way to free Israel from Egypt so that no one could claim that anybody did anything except for God. God's the one who freed them. Pharaoh didn't let him go. Wasn't luck. Wasn't happenstance. Clearly, God was the one the whole time. In the same way today, God uses a creative way to satisfy his wrath where he doesn't change his character. He's still just as wrathful towards sin. He uses this really creative way where he does it through Jesus dying for our sin, that no one can claim salvation apart from him. God's the one who saves. He's the only one. You see the echoing why God did this deliberately? It's pointing straight to Jesus. Right? We'll get there 2 weeks from now with a very, very direct Passover with blood spilled and everything, but this is still part of that story. 10 plagues are still part of this really amazing story of how Jesus reflects God's the one who saves. You don't save yourself. You can't do anything. We can't do anything to get in God's right standing. He's the one who did it. Just like he did with the Israelites, he did it with us. He's the only one. He's the only one that could. All right, so let's go through a little bit of God's uncomfortable sovereignty, because we kind of have to deal with it. A lot of these are just, I'm going to skip some of these. A lot of these are just proof texts of God's saying, hey, I'm going to do what I want to do. All right, and we just kind of have to deal with that. His uncomfortable sovereignty. This is proof text of when he said, but let's just talk about God's sovereignty, the story so far. Let's not even use the whole Bible. Let's just talk about really quickly what we've learned. Genesis 15, that's really early into the Bible, right? Really, really early in, okay? This is 3 chapters after he meets Abraham. As the sun was setting, Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick and dreadful darkness came over him. Then Yahweh said to him, know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out with a great possession. It's 3 chapters after he met Abram. This has already been foretold. It's already going to happen. God's been in charge the whole time. It's like he's telling a story through history. That's what he's doing. He already knew. Part of it. Let's go through when Joseph is sold into slavery. Okay, just skip to verse 7. It says, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth. There's all this evil in Joseph's life. He is sold into slavery. He's put in prison, all this stuff. And he says, God sent me here. Not you guys. Not the ones who sold me. God did. But then he combines this idea of God's sovereignty and how, yes, we still do have meaningful choice. He says, you intended to harm me. You guys sold me into slavery. You intended to harm me. God intended it for good. Okay, so I'm not going to go into a crazy theological depth of trying to understand, but here's some things we know are true. We know that we have meaningful choice. We know that. We know that we are accountable for our actions. God says that. We know that God responds to real prayer. We know that. And we know that God is in charge and control of everything as well. And somehow these overlap. There's a field of theological little disagreements, but we know and can agree that those are true. God is sovereign. He's in charge. He either allows or causes everything to happen. We know it's true. And the whole argument of how far he allows or causes is kind of where the Christian church has distinction, but we still know he either allows or causes everything to happen, and we are still responsible. And those two things overlap. And what happens is human understanding, human dimensional thinking meets a God dimensional reality, we're going to be perplexed. And that's part of why God's God and we're human, right? We can't understand how Jesus is fully God and Jesus is fully human, but he is. We can't understand the Trinity. There's 3 in 1 God, but he is, right? And if we could fathom God, then he's not God, right? If we can put him into a box and say, I get it, makes sense, then we wouldn't worship him, right? That's the whole point. Is like for heaven, it's going to be amazing because we're going to drink 1 drop worth of the goodness of God, and he is an ocean. And we're going to forever and ever and ever be experiencing the goodness of God at a new level and a new level and a new level. There is no end to how awesome he's going to be. His sovereignty is one of those things where we go, I don't know if I get it, but I trust you. Don't understand it. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, there is no other. I am God, there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning. From ancient times, what is still to come, I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. He alone is God, and there is no one like him. One more quote from Gary Schnitzer. To soften or explain away God's hardening of Pharaoh's heart because of the biblical witness to the holiness and goodness of God misses the other side. So in other words, instead of saying, hey, God's good, God's holy, how could he do this to Pharaoh, right? He's saying, if you try to argue those points, you're missing it. There's an explicit slide of this case. God is sovereign. That is one of his character elements. He is sovereign. Whether or not readers understand why or how, they can read for themselves that judging Pharaoh as he did was God's prerogative. He's God. Sometimes we have to go with the truth of God and be like, I just need to get to a place where I accept it because it's true. I don't understand it. So it's what you're allowed to do things I'm not allowed to do, God. You're allowed to raise up people just to crush them. It's what you're allowed to do. But it's always for our good. It's always for our eventual good. Okay? God is uncomfortably sovereign, but at least this week, let's take it to be a place of comfort. God is comfortably sovereign because we know he's coming back. We know he's going to go to war with sin and death. And we know if he's sovereign that we know he will not lose. He will not lose. Just like, you're going to find this out, but Moses and the Israelites, they sing over the destruction of Egypt. And we're going to be singing, oh, sin, where is your victory? Oh, death, where is your sting? Our God beat you. We don't lose. He doesn't lose. You can be comforted this morning and this week when you go that you're on the winning team if you're with God. He's sovereign. Turn it into a comforting sovereignty. God, you don't lose. Nothing will stop you. You've got a story to tell and you're going to tell it. He's going to come back. He's going to save us all. It's amazing. Okay, so let's respond with a little bit of practicality. One thing is let's worship God like crazy. He is transcendent. He is holy. He is all other. Excitedly, reverently. There's one God and it's him and there's nobody like him. Sing to him with awe. Awesome power. My baby Ezra, it's crazy. There's like a 5-minute window will go by and I will just stare at him and say, he's so cute. He is so cute. He's so cute. I just can't get tired of it. And it makes me think of that's how it's going to be when we're in God's presence. He's so awesome. Oh, he's so awesome. Oh, he is so awesome. Man, God is so awesome. Oh, God's so awesome, right? And we're just going to go and go and go. God is so awesome. He doesn't stop. Man, worship him like crazy, right? Repent and choose life through Jesus rather than death. He gives us a way, a very good picture with the 10 plagues. Puts your sin on the person of Jesus, where he is still just as judging and wrathful, and he crosses it with his mercy, and he puts it on somebody else instead of you. And he puts your sin onto my sin onto Jesus, punishes Jesus, and then we inherit Jesus' righteousness. Man, that's not an invitation. There's the invitation. You're going to come to a winning team, And you're going to be forgiven to a good God who wants to have a relationship with you, who wants you. Don't forget that. Doesn't tolerate you. He delights in you. He wants you. And lastly, we can take comfort in the sovereignty of God, that he will accomplish his purpose. We can sleep easy. We can tell people about him. We don't lose. God doesn't lose. We're going to beat sin. We're going to beat death. It might not be in the timeline. Hey, came back. Might not be in the timeline that you think, but it's going to happen. Slower than we want. Yeah, I want Jesus to come back now. But it's going to happen. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are grateful for your sovereignty. We're grateful for your power. We're grateful for your awesomeness. I'll be the first to admit that I often forget about how big and powerful you are. Often. Forgive me, forgive us for viewing you smaller than we should. We pray that you would do things in our lives this morning, this week, where we can see your grandeur. We're so excited to spend this time with you in our future, where we get to worship you forever. But we can start now. We can start now. To worship you for who you are, worship you for your goodness. Please put yourself rightly in our hearts as number one, the most powerful. Thank you for your word. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you that you didn't change who you were in your wrath and your judgment, but thank you for having mercy through Jesus Christ on us, who deserve the same punishment as the Egyptians, but we don't get it as long as we believe in Jesus. Thank you. Thank you for that. You are a good God. May we worship you excitedly and humbly and reverently. In your name we pray. Amen.